りおしまい。
Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to Get the Mic, the only show where your host on the left, Owl,
And your host on the right, Brock.
dissect fiction for its mythological significance. On this episode, we're going to be talking about Dragon Ball, as usual, and in particular, episode 104, which is called Mark of the Demon, or in the Japanese, Revive Son Goku. So we're going to get into that in just a second, but before we do, if you like what you hear during the show, give us a like, hit that red subscribe button. We upload new episodes Mondays and Thursdays to YouTube and on Tuesdays and Fridays to Rumble, so join us on either of those platforms. Anything before we start, Brock?
No, let's get into it.
All right, so without further ado, this is Mark of a Demon. Of the Demon, I should say. So the first thing we see is that in a dirty alleyway, Tambourine attacks and kills Bacterian, leaving him dead in the trash with a demon symbol on his back. Back in Pilaf's airship, Piccolo says that he'll create a new dragon-type warrior to hunt the remaining Dragon Balls. He then chants the lyrics to a children's song and pukes up an egg that hatches into a dragon he names Symbol, giving it the directive to hunt down the balls. Pilaf shows Symbol where the nearest Dragon Ball is located, and he flies off to retrieve it. On the ship, Pilaf begins to realize that Piccolo doesn't plan to show any appreciation for his revival. So there's a lot to say here. So the very first thing we see, I want to mention that the scene with Tambourine attacking Bacterian, it's really interesting because we rarely see scenes like this in Dragon Ball. We kind of get a different perspective. We get from this hobo who's like looking at the corner and seeing shadows be cast upon the wall, let's say.
Right.
And so he goes up to him, and then we see the fight proper, and it looks like Bacterian has the upper hand for a second, but his punch is caught by Tambourine, and it's actually very symbolic and not unintentional at all, because what happens when Bacterian's punch is caught is the shock from that basically makes him undergo an ego death.
Right. He's enlightened with lightning.
Yes.
As to what his position really is, which kills him.
Shocking that his position is so low to him after being in the Tenkaichi Budokai, let's say.
Right. And I also like the situation, just the setup of this, where what we're seeing is that the fighters that come together for the Tenkaichi Budokai are all from different stations in life. Some of them are professional fighters and they're famous. Some of them are literally like homeless that dig through the garbage. And so we see this what doing this process reaps in the world. This process being going around and killing all of the representatives of all these different walks of life in the heroic competition in the Tenkaichi Budokai. And so,
Let's say all the spirits that exist in any hierarchy anywhere.
so this is the disaffecting spirit pushing down even on the bums and the hobos and the people who maybe they would see someone famous being killed and they would rise up to the occasion and rise up out of the gutter and sort of be this unsung hero. This is showing that the evil in the world is discouraging everybody, small to big, everyone, known to unknown.
The terror of King Piccolo knows no quarter, let's say.
Yeah,
And so he drops the demon symbol on him as he goes, and we were going to address that this episode because last episode was already going so long.
right.
But the symbol that Tambourine leaves behind,
The
there's
mark of the
actually
demon.
only one person that he doesn't do that to, and it's the one person who survives this onslaught. Goku.
Somehow he just doesn't do it.
Well, he didn't. I guess he didn't know he was a martial artist at the time. I guess that's the best explanation for it. In let's say diegetic explanation, obviously in symbolic explanation, Goku's not dead. The spirit of the hero is not destroyed
But
by
it's
what
not a
he's come
coincidence
across.
that he doesn't know ahead of time who Goku is and mark him with the mark of the demon, right? And
Right.
I
Yeah.
think that's a good segue to talk about the mark of the demon now that we're in the episode called Mark of the Demon, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so one function of the mark of the demon is that it leaves this calling card to let anyone who remembers, like Roshi, know that terror has come again, to discourage them from trying to rise up. It's to instill fear in a generation who knows what the symbol means, or who, and the symbol I think is sort of born out of the restricting or the naming or the defining of the boundaries of what Piccolo's mode of being is, which is what happened with him being sealed away. It's a very symbolic move, which is defining him. It restricts what he is to a single concept and then locks that away. And so, in a sense, that act creates the symbol of a demon. And so when he comes back, all he needs to do is make the mark that defines what evil is and say, this was done for evil. This was done in a demonic sense. And because his mode of being has been confined and defined down to demonic, he can leave that mark as a calling card for anyone who would recognize who he was, right?
Well, and like we were saying, his goal here is not just the eradication of the existing heroic spirits, but all heroic spirits that could exist in the future.
Yeah.
So, to that end, this is the antithesis of what the heroic spirit is supposed to be. Like we've said in the past about superheroes and about, let's say, Goku's helping Turtle in the very beginning of the show, good deeds cannot be done so that you become famous or you become well known or for personal gain or anything like that. Um, to walk that path is to do those things along it that are beneficial to being itself, regardless of, let's say, regardless of your recognition for doing so.
Or your selfish ambition or your own
Right.
personal
And
strength.
so we see this as the antithesis because Piccolo's mode of being is something that he is trying to take credit for and say, this was me. Right. Um,
This was done in my image,
mhm,
which is the antithetical spirit to the spirit of the Father. It's sort of the anti-father spirit of Satan.
exactly. And so it's a devouring type spirit, and it's one that wants to take credit for those evil deeds, antithetically to what the heroic spirit is supposed to do, which is not worry about that aspect of it, but to do good for good's sake.
Right. Which this is not the same as, let's say, the Majin mark of the demon, right? It's like the mark of the devil in a different sense by the time we get that far. This is more to, like, you will know them by the fruits they bear, sort of thing. And not, this isn't corrupting. This is just, this is crushing the potential for heroism
It's not corrupting the
yeah.
heroes. No, they're not trying to get the heroes on his side. They're They're
Right. He
eliminating
doesn't
them.
want heroes. He wants to birth his own army of demons that aren't from this world,
And
right?
that is the ultimate, let's say, evil that would have to be combated by the ancestral um, father himself. Because think about how the development of humankind has persisted. Um, there's the option always in civilization to choose not to rise up when the time comes to, let's say, set order in a land of chaos. And when that happens, those civilizations crumble to the ground. And so we can see that in the past that's always something that has been grappled with. And that's kind of what's instantiated by Mutaito is that not only was this grappled with by Roshi and Mutaito, but Piccolo himself is obviously older than them.
Yes.
Now, why he's unleashed we'll get to later, but the point being that the idea of having to choose whether or not to be a hero, that that choice is something that is grappled with by our ancestors, let's say. And the only ancestors that succeeded, let's say our current ancestors, were ones that did adopt a heroic spirit for the most part.
For the most part. I mean, it's not a universal, but it creates a category because of how consistent it is.
And so how this translates to the human race and, let's say, progress of civilization is just that, right? Our ancestors had to deal with that problem. And so now coming into our own as a civilization, every civilization will have to tackle this problem of the destruction of the heroic spirit.
Right. How do you continue to nourish it? How do you keep it balanced and give it a space? Which it is the thing that walks the line between order and chaos, right?
Right, exactly. And
Before we move on from this too,
oh,
what's going on with OBS? It's like not counting up our recording.
oh, that's nothing. It just sometimes doesn't do that.
Just
It's
making
it
sure it's working.
it's working. It did that a second ago with our test as well.
But yeah, I think that it is this is that manifestation of whenever there's no order to combat that chaos, right? So it's creating it's making a space where that balance can't be struck for the heroic spirit, right? To be in sort of in the middle of the two because there's the chaos is overpowering the order.
And so Goku needs to do what? Adopt a more orderly self, and we'll see how that
Which, in order for
manifests.
him to be able to do it, of course, he's going to have to transcend a literal forest, a literal chaotic space, and create order from it again. Which is
And
what is going to be happening throughout this episode.
yeah, exactly. And so the next thing we see here is Piccolo creating his new child, his dragon type warrior, to hunt the remaining Dragon Balls.
Hmm.
He only does this when prompted by his unbirth, or let's say off-screen birthed child, Piano.
Hmm.
Who I do briefly want to mention. His voice in the English dub is really annoying. His voice in the Japanese dub is just like normal. So just just so we're clear on that.
Right, and we say that I think he has a female voice actor in the English and a male voice actor in the Japanese, which is even more confusing because it's like, are they trying to say that this is a female character in the English, or is it just another instance of
Well,
a
I
male
think
character with a female voice actor?
it's really weird because as a character who can't, as one of the only Piccolo children who can't fight, uh giving Piano that female voice actor is just a really bizarre choice to me. It's like, let's do it.
This
But
isn't Piccolo's secretary
yeah,
necessarily.
exactly, right? I'm like, it's kind of his advisor. But anyways, so he births this dragon type warrior, and it's significant too because he is questioning Pilaf on the nature of the Dragon Balls. Um and how he can gain eternal youth from using them. But he wants to make this dragon type, and it needs to match dragon and dragon. So the reason he makes Symbol to get the Dragon Balls right is because it is that manifestation of the natural chaotic predatory in the world that can find those elements of wisdom and guard them like a dragon guards
Right, he
treasure,
he
let's say.
literally needs a dragon to go gather up the treasure.
Yeah, he's like, Yeah, exactly. To go hoard the treasure and hoard the wisdom, right? He, as Piccolo, as the as King Piccolo, as your adversarial spirit here, has domain over dragons themselves and can have those gather up for him those things.
Very
Meaning,
similar to what we see in Mesopotamian stories about birthing demons, being the
Kingu, yeah.
Kingu being the sort of the progenitor of demons, right?
Well, it would be wouldn't it be not Baphomet? What's her name? What's her name?
Tiamat,
Yeah. So Tiamat, right, is the one that gives birth to the demons, but Kingu is like the demon king of demons, right? He's her
right?
greatest
There's
creation.
sort of a combination there
Yeah.
because of what we'll learn a little bit later, also about King Piccolo and his origins. But there's this sort of interesting thing there where there's a cosmic level that Piccolo is on to be able to birth dragons in the first place.
Yes. And
And
it is
and also want to point out here that King Piccolo is like a hermaphroditic being, right? In that we know that Namekians now, of course, in the fandom, they don't have sex, right?
they're asexual
They're an
beings, yeah.
asexual and they have an asexual reproductive
Which what's
process,
necessarily the difference between that hermaphroditic idea, right? In
right?
that,
Which
right.
is, you can trace that to almost any creation myth with that of, say, Adam Kadmon or Adam from the Bible. Baphomet, you had mentioned, is also a hermaphroditic
Yep.
being.
Yep.
And
Yep.
so he
And
is
that
in that,
actually scales with Piccolo pretty well.
right? And he is the progenitor of that chaotic because it is that Ouroboros,
Mhm.
right? That which has birth out of itself and is self-sustaining and doesn't need to have an other to sustain itself. It's very much he's like that snake eating its tail, and so
And
he
it
does birth dragons out of that
mhm.
chaotic energy or that dominion he has.
Right, and so by how he does it is he has to chant this, let's say, children's song that
Hmm.
kind of perverts the idea of play,
Yeah.
and much like using the idea of play to summon up the strength of spirit to compete or to survive that Goku has used in the past, this chanting of this antithetical spirit of play is able is what is able to summon this dragon, meaning, right, that dragons don't play by the rules of play, right? They don't benefit from it. They're not going to be defeated by the idea of play either.
Right. The existence of the dragon is part of the basis for there being rules of play in the first place because that's how you develop an approach to a dragon. And it's really interesting too because I like you mentioned that this is a perversion of play because this chant he's saying is a derogatory, mean thing. It's a mean game that kids would play, from what I'm reading. It's
From our research,
from a little bit of research. It basically says a child is chosen to be it and turns his back to the other children playing, and then they chant. This is direct translation. Chinaman, Chinaman, who's poking you? And they jab him in the back. Um, And so there's sort of a mean spirited element to this where it's treating somebody like the other and mocking them for being chaotic or being outside of the definition of what is considered the in group, right? And so what he's doing is he's manifesting a chaotic spirit to embody all of the chaotic, all that doesn't fit within what's defined, to go out and gather up chaos and be the guardian of it. And he does that because that's the way that Piccolo works. Number one, to play games with people to demoralize the heroic spirit, and number two, with Piccolo being named Piccolo and wanting people to dance to play the game, he perverts the game and creates an arbiter to guard all that is not within the game, right?
right? All that's off limits of that, and that's that symbol. And so he tells Symbol to hunt down the Dragon Balls, and Pilaf, using his dragon radar, is able to show him where the Dragon Ball is, and so he leaves to go get it. Um, Significantly here in the very last thing, it's not Pilaf who says this,
It's pointed out to him
but it
by
is,
Mayan Shu
but it is Pilaf who says this basically.
since it's a part of him.
Pilaf's immature and unfulfilled logos masculine spirit basically indicates like this isn't working out. He's not appreciating us for bringing him back. And it's interesting that they use the word revival because this episode is called, not only is this episode called Revive Son Goku, but he wasn't dead, let's say. This idea was just cast aside by the spiritual father.
Exactly. And Pilaf in the last episode sort of got him to agree to think about the idea of giving him a quarter of the earth in exchange for reviving him and telling him about the Dragon Balls. And now that Goku's been defeated by him, there's this feeling amongst him and the homies, which is that there's really no reason for him to give you anything
You're at his mercy, yeah.
because what are you compared to him if Goku doesn't even approach him, right?
Doesn't even approach his minion.
Exactly. And so they're looking up at him, trying to like talk their way through this again. Oh, it was half. Oh, it was a third. Oh, it was a quarter. And Piccolo doesn't respond to them at all. He just looks down at them with pity. And so then
Pity.
at the very end,
I don't know if it's pity.
maybe
It's more
disgust
like
even.
disdain.
Yeah.
Yeah, disgust. I think it's disgust.
But as he looks at them, there's a little shot at the end where Pilaf finally just hangs his head
Yep.
like he's dejected because he realizes that there's no negotiation left. With Goku gone, all of the known fighters that could challenge him being systematically picked off. Pretty soon, there's not really going to be any reason for Pilaf to have anything to do with him anymore.
And he'll be done with Pilaf. And this to say too, right? Like we don't see the cat and the fox in Pinocchio. We don't see them. I mean, we see them get gold, right? But we don't. They don't stick around after that. They don't stick around to be used by the coachman again because they're really at the coachman's whims at that point. And the same thing here. It's uh, these the foolish adversarial spirit of Pilaf is bitten off so much more than he can chew that it could end up actually killing him. And so at this point, they're starting to realize like, not only do we not need a part of the world, but let's just hope he doesn't kill us.
Right. Now it's about survival. It's about
And to think too,
can I survive in this new world?
the idea that Pilaf thinks he would be grateful for his revival shows that Pilaf is ignorant to the actual malice that he's summoned up.
Right. That malice is undifferentiated, right? Because he thinks that to be malicious is to be self-interested.
And yeah,
But
to be self-serving.
Piccolo is self-serving, but that does not mean that Piccolo is an evil spirit. What makes Piccolo evil, of course, is his orientation against being, which is something that Pilaf can't even comprehend.
Right. And it's only done incidentally by Tao Pai Pai, but here it's like intentional. This is the
It's systemic.
manifestation of it, right?
Yeah.
It's the instantiation of the elimination of the heroic spirit entirely. And so finally we get over to Goku, who in the forest Goku awakens to find that he's starving. When he tries to eat the fruit in a tree, it bites him back. He can't even eat a kangaroo without being beat up because he's so empty. Meanwhile, Tambourine flies on his way to his next victim, Manwolf. Back at Roshi's island, the Goku fills Tien and Chiaozu in on the Dragon Balls, and they agree that they'll need to use the wish to destroy Piccolo before reviving Krillin. Turtle says that he'll be dead for an awful long time, but Bulma assures him that she'll preserve his body in a Cairo capsule. Roshi then calls out the color of Bulma's panties, causing her to beat him down. He has multiple bumps and bruises on his head. It's
He's
pretty
pretty
good.
beat up.
On the TV, when they see that the other fighters have begun to be killed off, Roshi tells Bulma to build a replacement radar, and they begin to relocate the house, taking it with them in a plane. We then see that Manwolf is dead, drifting down the river with a demon sign planted into his back from the stake that apparently killed him.
I like this segment here with the relationship that we know is between Manwolf and Roshi, right? And the whole setup here, which is that um, that Roshi has a responsibility that he needs to take, but at the same time it's very it's dubious that he'll be able to even take that responsibility on, given how long he's lived in his blindness.
Sure, yeah. I mean, he wasn't able to defend Manwolf, obviously.
Right.
And so, hmm,
But before we even expand on that, I guess we should talk about Goku and his
yes.
inability to feed himself, right? We've seen this happen before, actually, at the beginning of his travels uh, out into the world, right?
Yeah, and some of those filler episodes, let's say, even though
But the same
they're filler.
situation happened there where Roshi sent him out into the world and told him that he needed to travel without the Nimbus, similarly to here. And whenever he started his journeys without the Nimbus, he found that he couldn't feed himself. And that was whenever he learned of Tien's mode of being and how Tien was feeding himself by manipulating the heroic or the goodwill towards the heroic spirit.
Well, yeah, in the Gourd episode, he feeds himself by uh, rescuing the princess, right? Or not the princess, but rescuing the town from.
Rescuing the town from Inoshikacho, right?
Then he rescues the princess in the Demon Land episode.
That's how Goku feeds himself,
And
yeah.
that's why he feeds himself there. And so here we really need to see Goku find the bit of wisdom within this chaos.
And again,
And
he
that
just
is
fought a
what-
Demon King
Yeah.
in that little section to show that that's how he needs to feed himself, right?
hmm
And so he already knows, he has the intuition from those filler episodes what's going to be needed on this path, which is that when you cannot feed yourself,
Well,
you need to
remember,
be
he
able
doesn't
to
defeat
do
the Demon King.
right. He seals him away,
Yeah.
which is a necessary process that was foreshadowed back then.
Which is why those episodes are pretty good. I guess well received by you guys too. I mean, some of them almost have 1,000 views now.
Yeah, but it's good to be able to call back to these episodes now because the relationship of Goku to the world and being out in chaos and needing to learn what it means to be able to be self-sustaining again was a trial run before, but now it's real, right?
Exactly. Now this is the real deal, and Goku's already been cast down into the unknown.
Yes.
And so he tries to eat the fruit in a tree, but like we said, that is not what satiates the hero. And it's so interesting that it's a gag, but it's also so symbolically true. Like, you could imagine there are mushrooms all around him. Goku could eat this frog, right? But he doesn't, because that's not what satiates the hero. And it's pretty much, it's basically embodied by these man-eating coconuts or whatever they are.
Right.
It's to say that this is not what you need to nourish the hero. The hero needs to be nourished by the process of enlightenment.
Right. And there's a symbol of that he'll find in our next section.
Mm-hmm.
But for now, we have to.
We just know he's on the lookout.
We need to be shown that he can't simply do that and that he needs to learn a lesson to be able to do it again.
Yeah. And so he's on the lookout for some nourishment. And so we see briefly that Tambourine's on his way to Manwolf, and then we see Roshi, like you were saying, that that not duality, because they're not dual spirits, but it's that, let's say, reflection on Roshi's character indicated by the introduction of Manwolf as a victim.
Right. And so we see in this situation,
Manwolf never would have joined the Tenkaichi Budokai.
right. Manwolf's name is on this list because of Roshi's destruction of the moon. Right.
Which in turn was kind of Roshi, in destroying the moon there, was kind of doing what Mutai Ito did by sealing away Piccolo for Goku specifically, though.
Yes.
Sealing away the propensity for him to be overcome by that aspect of his being. And so
now this is interesting. I've said this a couple of times, but that is a result of a flaw in Roshi, I would say, in the same way that his solution to Fire Mountain was to destroy Fire Mountain.
Yes.
Which is that he does not have the dexterity to articulate himself in the world in a very
spiritual
complicated
dexterity,
way.
let's
Right.
say.
And so when everything, or I guess you should say, when you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail, right?
So time for a Kamehameha.
And so time for Kamehameha. He just throws this incredibly powerful ability to recognize the truth and speak it into being and create order with it, that it's extremely powerful. And this is the opposite of what happens with Obi-Wan in the Kenobi series, because we were talking about that, where he just gets weaker.
Yes.
And so his skill goes down, but his strength goes down as well. And I don't think that that's right. I think
it's
that
not
this
even
is,
that every problem looks the same to him or needs the same solution. It's just like he has no ability to solve any
Right.
problems.
But Roshi does have the ability, it's just that he needs to rely on a destructive force. And so we see that at the same time that Manwolf is being hunted and he's about to be killed, there's this weird moment for Roshi where, as they're discussing what they're going to need to do to prevent Krillin rotting away while they gather the Dragon Balls and defeat Piccolo, all he's doing is staring at Bulma's panties. And we've
Yes.
actually made a big deal about Bulma's panties before this, right?
They're always a big deal.
Um,
Never. I don't think there's an instance of Bulma's panties being brought up that's just haha panties as a joke.
right. Um, this is pointing to what Roshi's flaw. I don't want to say necessarily just his flaw, but
Well,
where
it
his character has come up short.
it's a visual representation of his blindness to have it show Manwolf and then show Roshi looking at Bulma's panties, right? It's to say this is where we're going with it, and that Tambourine is doing this as a causation of Roshi's blindness, because it shows him going there, then it shows Roshi being blind, then it shows him dying.
Exactly.
It's like, if you're talking about filmmaking etiquette, in the way that things are sequenced in an order of shots, that's exactly what the visual story is telling us behind the scenes,
Right.
let's
It's
say.
telling us something thematic about what's happening here, which is that this is happening again as a result of Roshi not taking up a certain responsibility that belongs to him.
Well, and I don't even know if it belonged to him necessarily anymore. I think that the whole reason the Dragon World is the way it is at the beginning of the series is because there's been an absence of that the spirit which takes responsibility. Because think about it, there are no paternal spirits for Goku who are not ancient. The Goku's father, for example, does not show up. There's no adult men that are of prime age, let's say, that exist because there's been a gap in that responsibility. And I think that's for a reason,
Right.
but I don't want to get to that until Z, because it fits into the puzzle of like this huge
Right. But
contraption.
it's an inevitable pattern in the cosmic story that there's always the gap. Right.
Yes. And so let's say strong times create hard men create good times create weak men, and weak men create bad times.
Yeah. Hard times.
Hard times. Yeah, same thing.
And so,
And so
yeah.
we see like the greatest generation here with Roshi and Mutaito and Gohan and all that, but the gap is still present.
Precisely, and that's the opening that allows
And so,
Tambourine to go and murder the person who he sort of brought into the fold of the game, who brought somebody
mhm.
in by creating sort of this duality. By destroying the moon, he creates a shadow, right? And so that is his tail, let's say, that Tambourine can grab onto. This is a remainder that is unresolved for Roshi because Roshi should have been able to tame Goku. He should have been able to understand his tail and integrate it in all those
Well,
things, but he just didn't.
the blindness too, uh, prohibited him from putting those pieces of information together.
Right. So he's caught off guard by the Uzeru form when realistically he should have known that the Uzeru form was a part of Goku's being. But
Yes,
unfortunately, Roshi being more earthly and being separated from the earthly because he's out sort of in this unconscious sea sitting on an
island.
island,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
he just doesn't understand this earthly fact about Goku necessarily, but he sees the good in Goku's spirit. So he,
And
because of
that's
his
the thing.
inability
That's the
to,
difference,
yeah,
because he is separated from that because he's spiritual. And if we had a link between that, right, which would be more of a direct father figure to Goku, not a grandfather, but an
right.
actual father, then that would be the stepping stone.
But
But the
Goku has no literal father, as the
right,
hero typically does not, right? They're an
right,
orphan.
because it usually happens to be that there's that gap in responsibility.
Exactly. So this particular thing, though, um, with this being something that was unearthed, that was sealed away by his literal spiritual father, right? Then it passes down to Roshi automatically because he has the most
Yes, I
wisdom
see. Yeah.
to enact what his master did.
Right. He's seen it before. He can although it seems, well, We'll get to that in like the next couple episodes.
Yeah, he explicitly talks about that.
Yeah, yeah, we're gonna get to that. Uh,
But yeah, I just wanted to point that out because this isn't. It's not arbitrary that Manwolf is the one that's being killed in this sequence, right?
right, which is exactly what I was saying about the filmmaking
Mm-hmm.
practice. And so the last thing that really happens there at Kame House is they decide to leave, and Bulma
Right.
builds a replacement radar for them to go find the Dragon Ball, so they can wish for the dragon to destroy Piccolo.
Right. One other thing, I guess, that I want to read into the Bulma's panty situation is that Bulma's panties being a sign of her virtue and what happened originally with Roshi and Bulma's panties, which is that when she came looking for a Dragon Ball, right, he said, "Show me your panties." And she did not have them because she didn't realize that she had lost them under the sight of the hero, right? And so Roshi is paying attention to something that she has, that she has regained for herself. And there's sort of her attitude there whenever she's sitting casually. She doesn't really care if someone sees her. It's only whenever someone calls it out that she has a shame. And so there is a certain, it's almost as if Roshi is looking at Bulma's ability to be virtuous, ability not to think about something like that whenever she's being selfless and talking about preserving Krillin and using that technological ability she has. So whenever, and typically when she does something like that, Roshi always calls out her physical appearance, right, as sort of a balancing. She does some amazing feat. Oh, you're not just a pair of boobs, right? And this is him doing that again because as she's showing her creative, a selfless creative endeavor that she can use the gift from her father to do, he sees that and calls it out. But it's the way that he can call it out is specifically he's oriented towards the wrong thing necessarily, right?
Sure,
And
yeah.
so, but he does this all the time, right? This is another instance of him doing that at a time like that with Bulma.
hmm Yeah, it's just another chalk it up as another instance of it.
Yeah,
And so the last thing we see here is back with our main character. Goku is in the forest and he stumbles upon a giant fish roasting over a fire. We should have mentioned this before, but every time he sees food in this forest, he's like, "Food, I humbly accept," and then he
right,
gets smacked down or he like gets eaten by the piranha plants or whatever. And so he declares this one and he says he humbly accepts, and then he gets burned a little bit.
right,
And it's almost to say, right, that whole idea of um, acting impulsively and on instinct isn't necessarily the best way because it burns him, right? And so then he thinks about it and he puts out the fire and then he eats the whole fish, the entire giant fish. Upon filling his stomach, he finds that his strength has returned. He calls for the Nimbus before remembering that Tambourine has destroyed it. He then checks the dragon radar and sees there is a Dragon Ball right next to him. Just then, a boulder comes flying at Goku's head, causing him to dodge at last second. And when Goku calls out for his attacker to show himself, a fat samurai with a Dragon Ball hanging from his neck steps out, accusing Goku of stealing his fish.
So Fat Samurai, I love this character.
Oh, he's great. The Yaj. We're gonna get into more of the Yaj next episode. But right here we can already see what we've been building up to. This is the wisdom that Goku needs to find in the unknown to nourish himself. And that's why he finds the fish with Yajirobe, because Yajirobe has the Dragon Ball. It all works out that way.
Right, he has the one star ball hanging around his neck, actually,
Yes.
which is funny because Yajirobe does play a lot of a fool character for him, right? Yajirobe is showing up, as we're going to see in the next episode, as a fool archetype. And he has the one star ball as Pilaf did. And so there is a progression now for Goku that he's going to represent. So I want to point that out already. That him having the one star ball is obviously not going to be an arbitrary thing.
1 and 4 are so well
Yeah.
defined. So well defined. It's 1 and 4 that I think are the most well defined.
They consistently show up in the same context throughout the series.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, the I humbly accept it. That's Goku's mistake that he's making, right? Because he sees food and he thinks that it is an offering to him from the world because he's been at the top of the hierarchy
And Mother Nature has helped him all
and
along the
Mother Nature
way.
has always been on his side. But nature itself keeps on fighting back against him, right?
because he's not on the right path. But yeah, exactly.
Exactly. And so he sees the fish, and the fish has always represented this wisdom from the unconscious that somebody needs to partake of. They need to catch it and take it into themselves, and then it will give them insight, so to speak.
Yes.
And so he finds a giant fish that's roasting over a fire, and even though he burns himself trying to take it at first because it isn't really his, he does manage to take it, and this is a mistake, obviously, because it's um Goku is assuming that a fish that's laid out with nobody guarding it is a gift from nature to him, and it's not.
But it seems to nourish him because now he's in a position where he can subsume the wisdom he needs to nourish that spirit, and that's what Yajirobe really is for him. And so one other thing or two other things I want to mention is the Nimbus being destroyed
Yep.
and the radar that he checks. So the Nimbus being destroyed, um, that mouth beam that is used by Tambourine to destroy it, right? It is that idea, and this isn't like before where we heard that if he just calls it again, it can be summoned. Like we said last episode, the first time the Nimbus is destroyed,
It was a rocket.
it's by a rocket. It's by Goku misunderstanding the degree of malice that he's up against. In this instance, it's actually him that almost basically it's him that destroys the Nimbus because he is on such a mistaken path that he's weakened his way such that it can be destroyed by a demon
Right.
or
It's a breath
upended
attack.
by a
Right.
demon. Yeah, it's a
Which
breath
means that
attack.
the demons can articulate his spirit, and that destroys Goku's sense of direction
Yes.
in the world. Meaning that he's so, I don't want to say arrogant, but he's taking things for granted. He's taking the
Well,
world
there's
around
some
him for granted.
arrogance for sure. Yeah.
That Goku does not respect the world around him the way that he should, and that in the face of something like that, he does not understand its spirit and what it represents, and he thinks, for instance, that this is going to be another representation of a self-centered peel-off style antagonist that's just doing something for his own
Hmm.
benefit, right? And if Goku comes up against a spirit like that, you know, his sense of direction, his way, his moral compass will tell him exactly how to deal with somebody like that.
But those spirits aren't any kind of threat in the new world order that has just come about.
Right. Goku can reconcile the existence of people like that in his worldview, but what he can't reconcile is
Hmm.
this demonic mode of being. And whenever he speaks his spirit, whenever he literally breathes out who he is,
Yes.
that destroys Goku's moral compass, so to speak.
Well, it's let's say it's a combination of things that's spoken, let's say, by the breath attack, right? It's that the ancestral spirit can no longer protect. It's that the way that you're on is unholy, right? It's all of these aspects of what Goku's doing that destroys the way and undermines his path before him.
Right. And then he acts that out in stealing the fish
Yeah.
because he does not understand what his position is in this new world. He cannot even nourish himself, and he has to rely on someone else's ability to nourish themselves, to nourish himself, and inadvertently steals from them. And his blindness will come up even more in the next episode as he confronts Yajirobe and doesn't even seem to understand what he's done. Right.
Right. And so we will get to that next episode. The last thing I want to mention is just
The
real
radar.
quick his radar.
Yeah.
So he checks the radar, which we have to just harken back just for a second to say where the radar comes from and all that. And it's Goku's ability to utilize the feminine spirit's orientation towards the wisdom of the world, right? The openness,
The ability to find where the treasure is.
yes. And so he uses it to find the treasure is right where he is, which shows again that he's not following the proper path because he should probably already know that. Um, but
Definitely.
but he's not after that wisdom right now, and that was the whole issue. He was after revenge. He wasn't even after necessarily his Dragon Ball. He was after revenge in the last episode, and Tambourine actually calls him out for it. And then he uses his breath attack, which is kind of just like
Right.
truth, boom, bam, dead.
Right. That's sort of like the difference between Ray in Rise of Skywalker, where her whole motivation, getting to the end of the movie, is saying that she wants revenge against Palpatine for the things he's done, versus what Luke does in the original trilogy, which is he
Mm-hmm.
wants to redeem the spirit of Vader. He's not going there to get revenge and defeat him.
And that's the difference between the hero and the school shooter.
And so that's how you lose your way, right? You lose your
Mm-hmm.
path. So Goku explicitly is acting on that revenge, and that causes him to lose it. And then that's how he's so misguided here. And Yajirobe knows it, and he doesn't, and
And
he
he's
calls him
gonna
out. He
call him
says
out next
says
episode. We're gonna
explicitly.
see them clash.
Well, I like that because Goku. So on the topic of the Dragon Radar, Goku says that it was stupid of Tambourine to steal the Dragon Ball because now Goku can find him. And then Goku immediately loses him and goes for a different thing, right? Because Mother Nature is guiding him to the first step on his wisdom to be able to confront Tambourine, but Goku doesn't know that. Um, and so it's really funny because he's being very stupid in this part of the series, specifically because he needs to learn again. And so he says, "Haha, it was stupid of you to steal the Dragon Ball. I can find you." And the wisdom is actually the responsibility for the thing that he has just done. The literally his wisdom is to start taking some responsibility again. And so that responsibility shows up and throws a giant boulder at him. And we'll see in the next episode
oh man,
what he does about that.
y'all just so much.
Yeah,
Y'all just so much. It's we'll talk about him a lot.
I'm
next
excited to
episode.
talk about
Yeah, me too.
Yajirobe.
I think that's a good place to end off, though.
Yeah.
So if you guys liked what you heard, please give us a like, subscribe, hit that red subscribe button. We upload new episodes on Mondays and Thursdays to YouTube, Tuesdays and Fridays to Rumble, so check us out on those platforms. Other than that, I think this was a good episode, 104, Mark of the Demon. I hope you guys enjoyed the show. I'm your host on the left, Owl.
I'm your host on the right, Brock.
And have a good night, everybody.
Yoo-hoo! I'm back! Maybe he's asleep. Master Roshi. So, you'll train me now?
Well, let's begin that lesson, shall we? I want you to ask that girl there if she'd like to go on a walk with me.